when I make a reel that's like really simple, like the one that's, just in front of this, I often think people are like, it's not that simple. And it's true. It's not that simple. I have actually had multiple clients say like, well, that's easier said than done, this week. And yeah, everything is easier said than done. But often, like the best thing to do is the thing that's going to challenge you and that you need to do. Like one of those was in reference to the fact that one of my lifters, like she pitches forward and she gets a little toesy coming out of the bottom of a squat. And it's like, it's easier said than done to just try to stay in the heels. And it was like, yeah. And we could try to do all sorts of drills and XYZ to fix it, or you could just really focus on trying to stay in your heels and driving up into the barbell as you ascend, right? So it's all about like trying to understand what we're trying to do. And for that reason, I think when I make a post that's like kind of simplified rehab oriented, hey, figure out aggravating factors, figure out easing factors, and then grade the exposure. It's like, oh, that's, it's easier said than done. It's like, yeah. So the contextual factors that go into this stuff are you specific. It doesn't do me very good to like say a bunch of blanket types of posts on like stuff that like honestly are just confusing to other people who aren't in the same condition that like a person that I work with individually is, right? So understanding the overarching philosophy in rehab is really useful for just about everything, because if it gives you hope that things can get better, that's like really good. And somebody that I look up to a lot is Greg Lehman, and he's really right when he's like, most rehab is calm things down, build things up. How you go about doing that is about individual preferences and learning to tolerate and adjust stressors. And that type of stuff is super invaluable. Now, there are some people that would be like, oh, you can't just like run to rehab your running. And, to some extent they might be right. But also like you could just start really easy with your running. You could start with walk run intervals. You could really dose down how far you're going and build up there. Or you could do a bunch of like exercises that kind of, maybe simulate the forces that you're going to have to handle when you run. I think both can work. And I think a combination of the two is probably the best route, right? So just getting into like understanding how to identify aggravating factors. This is one of those things that patients and athletes, they don't like take into consideration all of the things that could be contributing and all the things that maybe hurt. They just kind of look like, I have pain, this is bad. And that's probably because they've been conditioned to think that way via like marketing and the traditional medical practices that they are subject to. But really it's like, hey, if you got low back pain, like think about all the things that seem to tick it off, right? Were you playing a game, like more games than you're used to, right? Are you sitting in chairs for really long periods of time without getting up and moving? Or are you, stooping over gardening for long periods or longer than you're used to, right? Does your job demand that you get into goofy positions all the time and you're really not prepared for it? Those are the things you got to start to consider. And then we want to look at like, okay, what seems to make it better, right? That can be like, hey, when I get good sleep, my back doesn't hurt as bad. That's a legitimate easing factor. It also could be like when I get rotating, I feel better. When I can actually deadlift and have less, when I hinge at my hips really well, I don't have as much back pain, right? When I don't lift as much weight, I don't have as much back pain. There's all sorts of factors that we can start to modify, and that's really cool because then we can build up your tolerance to things over time and improve your level of preparedness, right? So that's where the grading of exposure comes in, and that's where maybe dealing or dosing things up appropriately can really make a difference, right? So in the instance of somebody getting, calf pain with running, well, what can they do? Can they run at all? Yeah, I can run for 5 minutes and then my calf starts to act up. Okay, we know that 5 minutes is kind of your threshold. So let's do some intervals of 30 seconds on with some running, try to build up your tolerance that way. And then we just retest over and over. We can also introduce some calf strengthening exercises, right? We can introduce some easy plyometrics based on what you tolerate. So much of it is about just learning to manipulate the loads and the stressors you're putting on your system and your body so that we can build up slowly over time. And most people, again, don't have all of the tools in their arsenal to understand what they can do and what they should work on building up. And that's where having a good rehab professional comes in handy, right? But it's also not unrealistic that an individual who's just struggling with something couldn't identify things that seem to make things worse, things that seem to make things better, focus on making the things that feel better, the things that make it feel better for a while slowly grading up the exposure to the things that don't feel good. Most movements are stuff that, like, it's not that you should never do them again. It's that you should start easy, build up slowly, and good things tend to happen. So hopefully this was helpful. That's all I got for today. Peace.